don't have any special feelings about it than any other coming to market. But I would say that in 54 years, well, I don't think Berkshire's ever bought a new issue. I mean, the idea of saying the best place in the world I can put my money is something where all the selling incentives are there, commissions are higher, the animal spirits are rising. I mean, that's going to be better than 1,000 other things I can buy where there is no similar selling enthusiasm and the desire to get the deal done and extra commissions. That's the single best thing to buy on a given day. I mean, it's
I can't think of a time we've ever done it.
Yeah.
Ever bought an IPO?
Yeah, never bought one.
No. How can it be?
They don't even call us.
Yeah, but how can it be the best single thing to use your money for in a given day is something that they got everybody in the world out pushing it. And, it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, I'm not saying that necessarily what we're buying is going to work out better, but there have to always be better things than one single issue. If you make one decision on investing, if you can't find something among all the choices we see that is better than something that and like I say, the commissions they've come down, I think, now on this, but I mean, the highest commission thing that a stock salesman could sell securities was the new issue. So you have all this push behind it. We like to buy things where nobody's making a dime selling them to us.
Charlie, just specifically on some of these companies, and I won't talk about Uber versus any of the others, but a lot of these companies are coming very late in the cycle. They've had massive private capital that's been put to work to this point, and they still have massive losses and the need for more capital.
It's even worse than that. Some of them have preference for each round, and so the rounds aren't really fair rounds. There's a lot of lying in modern finance.
So you're not in favor of any of these big
I don't like lying.
What do you think of these? I ask this because we have a lot of retail investors who watch and who are looking at this and they feel the excitement behind it.
Well, you get any wonderful advice from us about buying IPOs?
Whenever you buy a stock, let's say you're buying General Motors, 1.4 billion shares out. We'll say the stock's 40, it's a little below that. You should be able to take out a one-page sheet of paper and say, I am buying the General Motors company at $56 billion because. And if you can't answer that question, if you can't write that out, then you'll go on to something else. And if you're buying Berkshire, you have to say, I am buying Berkshire Hathaway at $500 billion because. And if the answer isn't something you can write, you can't say I'm buying it because my neighbor thinks it's going to go up, or because everybody's talking about it on CNBC this morning, or whatever it may be.
Or I like to ride around an Uber.
Yeah, no, that's the question you answer. Now, when you buy groceries, buy everything else, you can answer that question. But if you can't answer it on something that you're involving your savings of many years for, why in the world why should you be doing it?
Let me ask you, gentlemen, about a topic that came up over the weekend at the annual shareholders meeting, and that's shares of Wells Fargo and just the company to this point. I got a lot of questions that were sent to me by shareholders questioning why you all have been standing behind Wells Fargo without saying more about what went on there. Charlie, what do you think?
Well, I think it's a fine company, and so they made one bad decision about an incentive plan. I regard it as an honest mistake, not as some deep moral failure. Nobody was being malevolent in the high ranks of Wells Fargo. They just had a blind spot.
They had a blind spot. It didn't get cleared up very quickly, though.
That's the problem.
Yeah, but you don't. They lost their jobs over a blind spot, but I don't think Tim Sloan had a blind spot. I think he just lost his job because life is hard.
You thought Dick Kovacevich?
I don't like it.
You thought Dick Kovacevich had a blind spot?
Yeah, sure.
And
the following guy.
Don Stump?
Yeah.
But you don't think there was any criminal activity?
Of course not. Well, the criminal activity was people below, and that was forgivable. They were under a crazy incentive system.
Is the problem fixed now?
I think so. I think a very, very, very high percentage of it would be. Certainly the intent is correct. I mean, it's cost the shareholders a lot of money, and they want to correct it. When I went into Solomon, I wanted to correct it too. I never could quite say it was over, though. People kept asking me, "It's over?" I don't know. I want it to be over, and I hope it's over, and I'm trying to make it over, and I'm looking for things. But when you have they have 260 or so thousand people. It's a scary job to be running a city of 260,000 people with no cops. And we have some things wrong at Berkshire now that I don't know about. Charlie beats this into me all the time. As soon as you find a mistake, do something about it. And sometimes that's unpleasant. But I've got to do it. I mean, I may have people that are deputized to do it, but it's my ultimate responsibility.
Yeah, and you do it too, fast.
Yeah.
Is Wells Fargo different because it's a shareholding and not an actual Berkshire company that you own outright?
Well, of course, we don't have any control over what they do.
Who should be the new CEO? Charlie?
Well, if I'd been picking it, it would have been Tim Sloan. But now they're going to get somebody. Sometimes a new person is better and sometimes worse. I think it's about half and half.
Yeah, that's something. Yeah. I met 2 weeks ago or thereabouts with 4 people, including Betsy Duke, the chairman. I never talked. That was the first time I met her in my life or talked to her. But we talked about it, and it's a tough position to fill.
What did you tell? You talked to the chairwoman of Wells Fargo and told her that you think what about?
No, they called me. I didn't call them. I mean, I didn't jump into it, but they just asked what I thought. That's the first time they have asked what I thought about it. And I gave him a suggestion or two.
What was your suggestion?
Yeah, these people have names. But I suggested publicly that not be somebody from Wall Street, not because there aren't plenty of good people on Wall Street. I just think that politicians are looking for the next one to beat up on, and it's good television, and it plays right into the campaign, and you need somebody running it that does not bear the extra baggage of having a label on their forehead that says Wall Street, which will cause half the viewers to cheer for whoever's doing the beating up of.
You heard at the top all of this concern about China. This is spooking the markets a little bit today. Joe's right. It's a decline of under 2% for the Dow, but still down 460 points is a number that catches your attention. And when you look at China's markets, down 5.5% and down 7%, that is certainly something that is catching their attention today, too. I can't think of three better people to talk about this morning. Bill, you've spent so much time going back and forth with China. You know the Chinese leadership very well and can understand maybe what they're thinking on some of these things. Charlie, you've spent so much time getting excited about investing there, and Bill, you've invested there as well. Warren, same thing. All three of you have traveled there and spent this time. I just wonder what you're thinking about this morning as you hear these headlines. And Bill, you're the new one at the table today, so I'll ask you to start off with this. What are your thoughts on what you hear with this tweet and the potential for a real trade war?
Well, I think good trade relations are an incredible win-win for both countries. And it's dangerous if people think this is a zero-sum game. And so I'm hopeful that despite the latest announcement, there is a trade agreement and the two countries can find ways to work together. It's the most important relationship in the world. Both sides bring a lot of strengths. So I understand why markets are a little bit worried that these tariffs are going to get higher and higher.
When we first got the tweet, there had been some initial reports that Li Hu and the delegation from China might not be coming here. That's what we were hearing last night. This is the first I've heard just a moment ago that the Chinese have confirmed that they will be sending that delegation this week. That in itself is good news. But how do the Chinese kind of deal with this when they're faced with real force, like I think that tweet yesterday was?
Well, I'm not an expert on negotiation, but it creates a dynamic where both sides could start escalating against each other, which would be a lose for both sides. So, this week it'll be interesting. Even though China's not a democracy, the political dynamics don't allow them to look like they're caving in to a unilateral position.
And Charlie, you are an expert in negotiation. What do you think?
Well, hardly, but if you go back, we put a tariff on trucks to prevent the Japanese from totally squelching the whole American auto industry, and that lasted a long time. It wasn't the end of the world. So if we end up with some trade settlement that involves some tariffs on both sides, I don't get excited about it at all. I regard it as part of normal life. Generally speaking, I think a good settlement is better than a lovely world war.
Some tariffs are one thing. 10%, we seem like our economy has gone along just fine, even with the 10% tariff that existed on those $200 billion to date. Is 25% tariffs on potentially all $500 billion plus of the imports coming in. Would that concern you about the American economy?
Well, I don't think we want a full-scale tariff war that's just as high as both sides can make it. That would be massively stupid. And if both of them are a little disappointed with the negotiations and feel a little roughed up, that's what they should feel.
What do you mean they should feel roughed up?
Well, both sides, since a settlement is so much better than a trade war for both sides, they ought to just get used to having a little loss of face and make some kind of a settlement. And I think they will.
What do you think about us taking a stance, us being America, taking a stance with China to this point?
Well, I don't think Trump is totally crazy to say that on some occasions you put a tariff on to save some domestic industry.
Is he right that we have been on the losing side of the deal for some time? There's a lot of Americans.
Well, I think he thinks of it more as a loss if we've got a trade deficit. And I don't think that's at all automatic. So I don't totally agree with him, but I agree with Trump in part.
Warren, what do you think in terms of who pays the tariffs? I mean, it has boosted the U.S. Treasury, but a lot of those tariffs are being paid by the companies that import the goods and then passed on to consumers.
Yeah, they're a tax on consumers. And as such, it changes what people buy. It changes where things are produced. I mean, you can readjust the world through tariffs. And generally speaking, I mean, there's obviously exceptions for key equipment, military equipment, but I generally think that a world that adjusts to something very close to free trade, more people will live better than in a world with significant tariffs and shifting tariffs over time. I mean, it was a subject of constant negotiation. And that sort of
probably less chance in war, too, if there's heavy trade on both sides.
Yeah.
Not a trade war. You mean a real war?
Real war, yes.
Because
but you got to remember that our country, the United States, ran on tariffs for the first 150 years. That was all the revenue we had. This is not like some novel new thing is coming in. This is an old subject.
Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, of course, I'd rather have total goodwill and everybody getting along. But I don't think it's the end of the world. There's some little tension on the subject. There has been since the start of the country.
Bill just now said he's not surprised by the market's reaction. Warren said the same thing earlier this morning. What about you?
Well, what do I care about it? brief temporary reaction over some uproar over trade negotiations.
Does that mean?
There are all so many little rebels in space-time to me.
Look, if you look at Chinese stocks in one market down 5.5%, and the other in the Shenzhen market down by over 7%, our futures are down, but that's still a decline of less than 2% this morning. Does that mean it's more painful to China than to us?
Well, I don't think China likes its market going down as a consequence of a trade uproar. I think the people are more like this settle a thing because they had this uproar today.
Settling sounds like a great alternative, but
It certainly does.
There have been a lot of friction along the way. The biggest one may be just how do you enforce it? And the feeling, at least among many of the trade negotiators in the United States, that when we've cut deals with China in the past, they say things and then don't follow through on it. How do you make sure that if we have a deal, it's actually enforceable?
I think China, by and large, is a pretty good place. It certainly worked well for the Chinese, and I think it's desirable that it works well.
We want China to prosper.
Yeah, we do.
If you postulate a world where in the next 50 years, China, or for that matter, the United States, but feel like they're being abused and the word isn't being kept, and you ask for one thing and then you want to ask for one thing more. I mean, you're going to always have tension between the two countries. You'll always have disagreements, but you can't really turn it where it gets into something where it gets out of control, and things can get out of control.
But I guess I'm going back to trying to figure out which side you think is right. Nobody wants to say that. Does anybody have a feeling?
I think they're both right to be as concerned as they are, and I predict they'll settle it.
Would you all agree with that same prediction? Bill, what do you think?
It's a dilemma when it appears you're reacting to an ultimatum. In the Chinese case, there's no elections scheduled, so their leader won't be unelected simply because they've had to take a tough stance on trade negotiations. Markets up until recently were assuming this deal would get closed.
Right.
So that's a little bit why you see the delta. The rational thing would be for a deal to get closed, and I'd still rate that as likely.
I agree with Bill.
Deadlines are tricky things, though. I mean, they produce reactions in people, and they can, particularly if you're responding to public opinion, they can inflame people, and then they start reacting to their own. They're tricky things. On the other hand, sometimes it's the best way to get things done.
A good sign, though, maybe that they just said that the Chinese delegation will continue to come, because I had real questions about that, or doubts about that myself, after seeing that yesterday.
You want to conduct negotiations so it doesn't look like the other guy has to cave or something like
Right.
that. The ideal thing is to make a hero out of them and still get the deal you want.
Over the weekend at the annual meeting, you two had an aside on stage that a lot of people kind of picked up on. You didn't follow up on it, so I thought we could do that here. You were talking about Dairy Queen and how your presence in China is not large, but you do have a presence in China.
Yeah, we're all over China.
For Dairy Queen, it is a very large presence, but not for Berkshire Hathaway.
No.
But you made the comment, Warren, that you would have been a much larger presence had a big deal gone through. You made it in as a aside to Charlie, but it was over the mics.
Well, we've looked at. It didn't have anything to do with Dairy Queen.
No. I figured not.
You're not turning Dairy Queen into some global giant. Or, we've looked at good-sized things in China, and we've done a couple things in China. And Charlie's done more individually, and it's logical. I mean, with the kind of capital we have, the big markets outside the United States are going to be the place where you're most likely to do something, and certainly China's going to be the biggest market, and outside the United States, and there should be opportunities there. And I think we are someone at Berkshire. I think that if they're looking for capital around the world, we're a very logical prospect.
Why did that deal not work out? Was it because of the trade tensions?
I can't go into any details on that.
Thought I'd try.
You'll be the first to know.
In terms of what you do with your businesses, do these trade talks have any impact on you, on your investments, even your own personal ones, because you all have a large individual portfolio that you do. And Charlie, I know you focus a lot.
Some are larger than others.
Well, Charlie, I know you focused a lot on China. Does this diminish your enthusiasm for Chinese investments in any way?
No.
No, it doesn't really. If we got a call today from some business we understood and liked from China, and they were looking for a lot of money, it was big, we would be delighted to get that call, and we would follow through and we'd see whether something happened. But that would be very interesting to us.
Bill, how about you?
Well, certainly, there is, in parallel with the trade talks about what the technology export regime will look like in terms of things like artificial intelligence.
Right.
And so I have some concerns about whether that will try and partition, Chinese students from American students. The general sentiment towards China right now has gone down a bit. And so there are businesses or business deals that have to go through a new process, and they're talking about even making that tighter.
CFIUS or beyond?
So I'm worried about even the sort of intellectual cooperation being slowed down. We'll see where that goes, but it's a concern.
If they take our intellectual property at Dairy Queen, we can handle it.
We've talked an awful lot on our air recently about socialism versus capitalism, defending capitalism, all of the different political pressures that are kind of being brought as we get into another election year. And I thought maybe we could talk about that this morning, too. Over the weekend, several questions came up about defending capitalism. And Warren, you did step out and say that you're a card-carrying member, a card-carrying capitalist in front of everyone. What do you think about the attacks that we've seen to this point on capitalism?
Well, I don't think people exactly even know what they're talking about. It isn't capitalism is perfect, but if you look at what was here in 1776 and look at what is here now, this country has done an incredible job in terms of the deployment of resources and human ingenuity. And that is a product of the system. Now, does that mean that every decision should be made simply by open market determinants? Well, there's a need for regulation, obviously, and there are things that have long-term costs and might not get built in. But the idea of people unleashing their potential, using the resources they have to create what we have now from what was here 240-some years ago, it's absolutely a miracle. And what all three of us have seen during our lifetime. And if you compare that with any centralized planned economy, I think we win hands down. And I think we've just started with what capitalism can produce in the United States. But I do think it needs certain rules and regulations.
Bill, you did an interview in Davos with someone, and you made a pretty innocuous statement that you looked around, you thought capitalism was the best system, and you got attacked online from all these people who came up with these crazy statements about how could you say things like that. I mean, what do you think about the climate when you see things like that?
Well, some people think when you defend capitalism, you're defending the tax rates we have today and saying that higher absolute tax rates or more progressive tax rates, that you're disagreeing with them. And I don't think Warren and I are disagreeing that you could make the taxes more progressive. In fact, we've been very explicit in some areas, like the estate tax, and saying we think that would be a good thing. Socialism...
You got your wish, you came back.
Socialism used to mean that the state controlled the means of production. And a lot of people who are promoting socialism actually aren't using that classic definition. So what we're going to have is capitalism with some level of taxation. Most people really aren't arguing against capitalism. There may be a few, but most people are just saying that the taxes should change.
Although you do have someone who I think is polling the second highest in the Democratic Party right now, who was a socialist until very recently, Bernie Sanders.
Well, whether or not he was a socialist by the full term of that. Now, there is some muddy areas. When you start to say there shouldn't be any billionaires, that you have some cap on wealth or something like that, that goes beyond what I think, and you could say I'm self-interested, but...
Really?
We will exempt the present ones. But government needs to reallocate some resources. I mean, the extreme case would be in World War II. I mean, that's the closest we've come to socialism. You had an Office of Price Administration. You had a War Production Board. But during peacetime, you're always prepared for war, and you do that through government. Government needs to reallocate some resources. But the market system, which exists under capitalism, is an extraordinarily effective way, and has proven it, of